It's okay if there's not. All right, I think we should get started here. It is 7:05 on the dot, so it is time. So welcome back, everybody, for part two of Church History Vastly Oversimplified. And now it doesn't work. Hello. Come on. Come on, mouse. There we go. Okay. Here's where we are. This is the overall schedule. We're on part two. We finished Constantine 2 weeks ago. Today we're going to talk about Augustine, part two of six. My disclaimers, yes, I'm going to say these every time. This is vastly oversimplified. You cannot cover this kind of amount of church history in 6 hours and not have it be vastly oversimplified. So there's a lot of stuff that gets left on the cutting floor. It's all very interesting and all important, but choices. I am not an expert. This is not my field. This is not what I've studied. I'm just a guy who's read some books, and I will do my best to separate what are my opinions from what are facts, as far as facts go in ancient history. All right. Here's our overall timeline. Today we are covering Augustine, which is down here in the 400s. I don't know, maybe you can't see the mouse, but that's all right. Down in the 400s, so late 300s, early 400s. Last time we talked about from the post-apostolic period, which was from when the last apostle died, which is approximately 100 AD. And we went up through Constantine, which he became emperor in
Hey,
313.
stop it.
Oh, got to be on mute. All right. Don't forget to mute. All right, especially if you're yelling at your dog. I hope that was a dog. Anyway, that's what we're talking about today. Here's a zooming in on that timeline. We're going to hit this on the right-hand side here. We're going to talk mostly in the late 300s, early 400s is what we're going to talk about. But that's just kind of an overall picture where we are, a little zoomed in idea. And we're going to talk about Augustine. All right, so consequences. We were just talking about before we started here. We've got this lovely map of the Roman Empire at the time of Constantine, and Constantine makes Christianity legal. That was kind of the big thing. And so the question is, what happens? What happens when you take Christianity, this post-apostolic Christianity, and you make it legal all of a sudden? Well, lots of things. And I think I've got a next slide that'll talk about more of this. There's also Constantine as Pontifex Maximus. So he declared himself as the chief priest of the Christian religion. That was part of his emperor cult. We talked about that last week some more. I won't go into the details. He also moves the capital to Constantinople, from Rome to Constantinople, and that has a major impact on both Christianity and on world history. All right, so let's talk about the impact that those things have on Christianity. So first of all, let's talk about Constantinus Pontifex Maximus. So when I was a younger Christian, when I first read about this, I had kind of an attitude towards the early church, or at least the church leadership during this time in 313, because I kind of thought like, what are you doing? You have somebody who is not a Christian, did not get converted to Christianity, is clearly a pagan, is not repentant, not baptized, declares himself to be the head of your church, and you didn't do anything. Like you didn't fight it. Like you just kind of went along with it. And I know I had kind of negative feelings towards those church leaders for a while. But then I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten probably a little wiser and a lot grayer. Um, I think I've softened a lot on that, and especially because I don't think it's a coincidence that you have Constantine showing up right after the Diocletian persecution, which was the worst persecution that ever happened. It was awful. And so I'm trying to picture if I was in the shoes of one of these, big church leaders, somebody important of importance in the church, and you've got somebody that comes along and says, "Hey, I'm gonna be Pontifex Maximus, but hey, I promise I'm not gonna get involved in the doctrine. I'm not gonna try to shape doctrine at all. I just want to make sure that you guys have what you need to be a unified church. And by the way, I'm gonna end all persecution." I don't think that they could say no. At least that's kind of where I'm thinking now. Like I don't know how you would have the I don't know how you would be able to say no. Like that coming off of that persecution. Yeah, that's just my thinking now is good luck trying to stand on principle when your your congregation has just suffered so much from that kind of persecution. So, and again, Constantine was true to his word. He did not try to get involved. He did not try to lead the church from doctrine or any sort of other thing other than just being an agent of unity. And a great example of this is the Arius heresy. So there is a heresy that broke out, and after Constantine, it becomes Pontifex Maximus, and he basically says that the Son is not eternal. So there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, parts of the Trinity. And he said, and Arius says the Father and the Spirit are eternal. They've been before the creation of the universe. They are eternal, but the Son was created by the Father, and so therefore is not eternal. And that was not accepted by the church overall, but it was causing this division. And so this discussion was going on, and so Constantine says, "Hey, let's have a meeting." And so he calls a council, just like this is how the church had always dealt with stuff like this. Is the church would they would call a meeting, and they would say, hey, "Let's all get together, send all the bishops to some place, and we'll have a meeting on this." And so Constantine does that. He says, "Hey, I'm calling the meeting, and I'm going to have it at my place at Nicaea. It's very nice. I'll see you there." And that was a terrible joke. I'm so sorry. I should have planned that one out better. That was just off the cuff. I apologize. Anyways, so he says, "Hey, come to my palace in Nicaea. I am paying for your trip. I'm providing the food. Big sleepover my place. We're gonna have a great time." And sure enough, he doesn't get involved in the actual work. He's just there to say, "You guys are going to stay here until you get this worked out." Um, so again, that he lived up to his word of not being, you know, taking that title to do something that maybe would have been offensive to the church fathers. Uh, Out of this Nicene Council comes what I'm sure you probably have all heard before of the Nicene Creed, which is up there on the screen. It's on the right-hand side there of the screen. Um, we haven't talked about creeds. Creeds date back to the apostolic era. So from the very beginning of the church, there were creeds. And creeds are simply just short, easily memorizable, almost jingles, like especially the first ones. The first ones were very short. There's like the Apostles' Creed is one of the oldest that was that we have record of, and it's also kind of known as the Roman Creed, but I think it was originally called the Apostles' Creed. But creeds had existed. Like this wasn't the first. And the whole point of creeds were in a society where the vast majority of people didn't read or write. They didn't have access to books. Books didn't really exist. Scrolls. They didn't have access to scrolls because they didn't read anyways. Creeds were a way of summarizing church doctrine in a easy to remember, easy to memorize, easy to just like a jingle, like it just rolls in your head. And the whole point of that was not just to teach the doctrine, but also to help prevent heresies from entering. So if somebody was like throwing out some weird ideas, you could just remember your little creed, and then you could be like, well, that doesn't fit with the creed, so I'm going to kind of say no to whatever you're saying, right? So that was one of the things. So and that was often what came out of these councils was a new creed or a modification of the current creed. And so that's what came out of this was the Nicene Creed, which is a well-known creed because this has been like this one has really stood the test of time. This is a creed that today there's lots of churches, lots of movements that'll point to this today and say, "Yep, that's we believe in that." He also promoted Christianity. Going back to Constantine and his role as Pontifex Maximus, not only did he make Christianity legal, he also promoted it to a certain extent. Now, this does not mean that he made Christianity required or favored, even. He just simply made it not illegal. And he did, however, help state funding for churches. And if we got a question, otherwise, let's check the mute buttons. Thanks. Um, he did help the state fund church construction, and it was beneficial to be a Christian from a political perspective. So, like, if you were part of the government or if you wanted to advance in the government or the military, it was beneficial to be part of the emperor's cult. That was always that would had always been the way to like really advance. If you were in the emperor's cult, you were like in with the emperor. So people still saw this as, well, I should join Christianity to help my career. And so there was being a Christian did help actually promote your career politically. I just wanted to point out, so like I said, Constantine did not, he just made it legal. And there was benefits to being a Christian, but he didn't go out of his way to push Christianity on people officially. That comes in 380. And so I just wanted to think Constantine is 313, if I remember right. 380, which do my math is what, 67 years later, in one person's lifetime, Christianity becomes mandatory. And I can't remember the name of the emperor, but there's an emperor that says, "Nope, now we're all Christians. If you're part of the Roman Empire, you are now Christian." And so from 67 years, Christians go from being the persecuted to the persecutors because now there are punishments for not being Christian. So just think about that. Like 67 years. That's frightening to me, but it also makes a lot of sense. Back to what the subject was. End of persecution. So you were in a little pre-meeting discussion. Great discussion. You already hit all these points. The first thing that happens, if you think about Christianity before Constantine, there were several barriers to entry. First of all, it was illegal. So persecution existed. So persecution itself was a barrier to entry. There's a lot of people who are interested in Christianity, but they're like, I'm not that interested. I don't want to, get tortured and die for it. So you guys do you, and I'll just be me. But I'll keep checking you out. Maybe. No, not really. Uh, you have just the concept of having to convert. So Christianity was very different from the polytheism, the paganism that was practiced, because in the paganism is more as much cultural. It's just something that is part of your life. You don't convert to a paganism, you just kind of practice it. Like so you just are. You don't there isn't this like conversion process. So that whole concept was kind of weird to some people. And so the idea of having to convert, having to change, you had to repent. Like that was a barrier to entry for people, right? Well, when you remove several of those barriers by making it legal, now all of a sudden, not only is there the barriers are pulled down, you also have a push effect because again, now there are political benefits to becoming a Christian. So you have the floodgates just open. And if you remember from last time, there was a whole pattern, there was a whole process to become a Christian, and it involved multiple steps. It took time, it took people. There were like essentially what we would call Bible studies. There was going to church many times to make sure that you were committed and interested, and you had to show convert. You have to show that you were repenting, and on and on. That whole system just collapses under the weight of mass numbers of people that want to come now and join the church. So this idea that you convert people and then they become Christians kind of falls apart. You end up having huge numbers of people getting baptized without conversion or very little conversion. And I'm just speculating here, but my thinking is that the church leaders were like, well, we'll get them in the door and then we'll convert them over time. It's my only guess, because they just knew that it was not practical to just turn people away and say, no, 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 our 3 or 4 teachers are busy. We'll get back. We'll put you on a waiting list. Here's a number. Take a number, and we'll get to you. No, I don't think that was not going to work. So they just ended up flooding the church with barely converted pagans. Already talked about political evidence. Before I get to that, one other thing that was interesting, this is kind of an aside, but I think it's interesting. During the Diocletian persecution, there were huge numbers of people that committed apostasy, that left the church, that by committing apostasy. After Constantine, you have this flood of people coming into the church. These people that had committed apostasy were like, hey, wait a minute, you're letting in random Joe dude who's like doesn't know the Bible from a hole in the ground. I mean, the Bible didn't exist. Doesn't know Jesus from Joe, and you're letting him in, but we can't come back. Like those of us that like were persecuted, we only fell away because we were persecuted, right? Like we let us back in. And if you remember, the church's stance was no. Like if you commit apostasy, you're done for good. You're never coming back. And so this caused a big split in the church. And there were two camps that said, like one camp that was the hardcore, no, stand by or nope, you committed apostasy, you're out, you're done by. And the other group that was like, grace, like shouldn't we forgive? Shouldn't we be about grace? You know, and eventually the church compromised and it said that each bishop in their own congregation could allow people to come back to the church who had committed apostasy on a case by case basis, with the idea being that, if somebody showed up at your door and you were like, okay, I worship Caesar, no, you weren't coming back. But if you were like tortured or something, or you under an incredible, you know, if you endured great persecution and then committed apostasy, then you were allowed to come back. So that was that was interesting. I can't imagine what the church would have been like in these early days. Like you would have had this old, crusty, hardcore people who had suffered under, torture perhaps, who stayed faithful and were just these rocks. And then you've got people who literally committed apostasy and then came back. And you've got these barely converted pagans. What was church like? It must have been chaotic. It must have been really challenging. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm a little. I just this is what I think about. I think it's interesting. Um, I want to talk about veneration of saints. So we talked about sainthood last time. So there was this whole. Um, it started as people who were super Christians, and then it was reserved for those who died who were martyred. So those who died under persecution, and they were remembered. The day that they were martyred became like a remembrance day, and every year the church would have a brief something about, hey, remember martyr so and so, saint so and so who was martyred, and remember this. We remember this about them. It was a way to keep the memory of those who had died alive. And now imagine just for a second, you are a pagan, just freshly baptized into the church. Now you're a Christian. Of course, you don't know hardly anything, um, and you're used to going through your day. When you would go to do something, you would sacrifice something or like worship a god in some way. Right? That's how you did polytheism, right? That's how you did paganism. Like you go to the market to buy something, you would offer a pinch of incense to the at the little shrine at the entrance to the market. You would go to. I joked about taking the garbage out. I don't think that works, but I'm bad at ideas about this. So you were used to like everything that you did, there was a worship or some sort of worship to a pagan god. And now you go to church and you hear them talking about these saints. Remember this saint who was so good at cooking. Oh, remember this saint who was good at fixing things. Oh, this saint who was made great clothes. Like it's not much of a leap for you to switch from doing your daily whatever instead of worshiping a god or goddess to just praying to a saint. You see how that like very quickly like becomes, you just kind of transpose one for the other, and you're technically not worshiping the saint, so it's not really paganism, but I mean it's paganism with just a very thin paint of Christianity coat painted over it, right? It's a thin coat of a veneer of Christianity on top of your paganism. And so this is one of the ways that paganism heavily it brings itself into the church. And I don't know if I should, I don't have time. But today, the church, the Catholic Church today has this whole story about saints and how they have special magical powers that give you access to Jesus because of their great whatevers they did in life. It's really weird. But it started here and it's still there today, and I need to move on. Anyways, um, stratification. So imagine a church, like I said before, where you've got people who are hardcore and you've got people who are literal pagans that barely, they're just there to uh-oh. Says my internet connection is unstable. How are we doing? Are we okay?
You cut out for a good 10 seconds, but you're back.
Okay, sorry. I have no idea what happened there. All right, let me. All right, hold on. I got to reshare. Sorry about that. Of course, something had to go wrong. Oh, I got to do it this other way. Hold on. Sorry. I don't know what happened. And now I need to go here. Oh, that's not what I want. Apologies. Sorry. This is super fun, I'm sure. Okay. Hopefully. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. All right. Yell at me if you don't see my screen. All right. Anyway, so sorry I got lost there. I don't know where I got left off on, but we're talking about saints or something. So anyway, hopefully you caught the rest of that. Anyway, like I said at the beginning or earlier, you have this like wide range of Christians, whereas before you had a pretty high standard, and people were kind of held to a high standard. Now that's kind of out the window. You've got people that are converting that are barely converted. Um, you've got um, you've got people who are there just because it's good for their career. You got, and there's no mechanism to push them out. That's the other big thing is without persecution, there is no mechanism to get out, basically. Like you have to kind of like commit a crime practically to get out, to be kicked out. So this kind of leads to those hardcore Christians who are used to like, they were fighting Satan, right? They were used to a life where, they were hardcore. Um, some of them, they want to live a more they're kind of sick of being with all these wishy-washy pseudo Christians. So some of them decide to go and practice asceticism. Now asceticism is a philosophy. It was a Greek philosophy that basically says everything that is physical is evil and everything that is spiritual is good. And it basically says the world that we live in is there's two sides to it. There's a physical world and a spiritual world, and that spiritual world is purely good with no evil whatsoever, and the physical world is purely evil and has no good in it whatsoever. And so ascetics attempted to partake in the physical world as little as possible. They were just rejecting the physical world essentially. So okay, anyway, the whole point of that is that some of these guys decide to go and live an ascetic lifestyle out in the wilderness. So they go out into the deserts, they go out in the wilderness, they want to live and they build a little tiny shack and they just want to be left alone. They just want to spend all day focusing on being the perfect Christian, and that's what they want to do. And there's some other people that are other Christians who are like, man, that sounds kind of cool. Like, I don't want to do it, but I want I it kind of sounds cool. I want to go see this, right? And so they go out and so what do these hermits who want to be left alone, they end up drawing crowds to them of people who want to hear about them and see them. And so they like when these crowds show up, a lot of these hermits just start like basically like trying to drive them away by preaching at them about how evil they are and how wicked and how they need to just, repent and, walk away from society and be like them. And it often backfires because it draws bigger crowds. Anyway, it's kind of a funny. I think it's funny. Um, but some of these hermits, some of these people that are listening to these hermits, they're like, I want to kind of do this. I want to focus my life. I want to be hardcore. I don't want to live in a tiny shack and live off of like slugs or something. Um, but I do want to live in a community that's totally focused on removing as much of the world as possible and just being focused on God. And that leads to eventually monasteries. And so you get first, it's just men who decide to gather together and live in a special place that's where they have it ends up getting very strict rules and like you just work hard all day and you pray all day and you pray all night and it's a way of practicing an ascetic style of Christianity. And that's about the end. We're going to talk about monasteries in this class, but which is sad because monasteries have a very important part of Christianity. But it is also an effect of this end of persecution in that you have, instead of everybody being a Christian and the standard being basically the same, like there weren't flavors of Christian, there wasn't different categories or levels of Christianity. Like everybody was kind of equally committed and equally into no, now you've got the super hardcore monks and living in a monastery battling Satan every day with their lifestyle. And you got other people who barely show up to church and probably couldn't tell you hardly anything other than a creed, right? So that's and you got everything in between. So now that's one of the consequences. But monasteries end up playing this really important role in the Catholic Church over the next 1,000+ years. Um, we're not going to talk about it much, but we are going to talk a lot about the corruption and failures of the church over the next several lessons. Um, one of the things that I'm not going to be able to say a lot about is how monasteries often act as a counterbalance to the corruption. They tend to be more of a purifying and trying to help the church not go down the road of corruption. So, but that's all I'm going to really say about them. The other big thing that happens out of this is you start getting infant baptism because you have this pagan mindset, and I should be careful about this. I don't know when infant baptism. I've been trying to figure out when infant baptism started for years, for decades, and I can't figure it out. So I do know that by this time, I shouldn't say that. I have very strong suspicions at this time that they are starting to practice infant baptism. Um, and I think it comes out of the pagan worldview that's more like you don't convert to paganism, you just are pagan. And so I think it's more out of a sense of not, it's kind of almost a rejection of the concept of conversion. It's just you are a Christian. We are Christians, especially after 380 when everybody has to be a Christian. It's kind of like let's just have everybody, let's start baptizing children. Let's baptize babies. Like so that starts to happen. And we'll talk more about infant baptism in this class. All right, halfway through the class, halfway through my hour, and here we are finally at the subject of the day, Augustine of Hippo. And no, Hippo is not short for hippopotamus. Hippo is a city in North Africa on the coast, kind of west of where Tunisia is today. It's not important where it is. It's in North Africa. That's all you need to know. Okay. Anyway, Augustine. Let's talk about Augustine. And no, I have no idea what's going on in this picture. Please don't ask. I am as clueless as you are. I don't know what the flaming heart thing's about. I don't know. Anyway, point it. Okay, Constantine. Okay, Constantine. Constantine. I'm going to say Constantine about 18 times when I mean Augustine. I cannot get their names straight. I don't know why, but because they sound the same. That's why. But Augustine. Okay, let's talk about Augustine. As a young man, he was clearly very bright, an intellectual type, very intelligent, excellent speaker, excellent writer, excellent communicator, talented dude. Okay, from early on, everybody saw it. This guy's a really smart guy, really talented guy. 10 talent dude, we might say, right? Okay, as a youth and as a young man, he was interested in all kinds of different philosophies. He tried everything that was out there. He tried Christianity, didn't like it. He read about the God being crucified, and he was like, "This is barbaric. This is weird. This is crude." Didn't sit well with him. So he didn't stick with Christianity much. Um, he's his big as we would say, sinful nature, like his biggest issue that he dealt with was lust. He liked the ladies, and it caused him all sorts of problems in his life. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But that's very important because it really shapes his entire career. Eventually, he's in Milan, Italy, northern Italy, and They're in Milan at that time. The bishop was a guy named Ambrose, which is a one of the church fathers. He's an incredible he was an incredible guy, and he was great at preaching. And so Augustine, almost call him Constantine. Augustine is in Milan, and he starts going to church to hear. Um, no, I just said his name. Now I can't remember what it is. Ambrose. Thank you, honey. My wife's in the other room. She's helping me out. Uh, so Ambrose is like, he goes to hear him preach because he's such a great preacher. And so that's where he actually starts getting exposed to Christianity consistently. And eventually he has this conversion moment. Okay. Now I got to take an aside for a second. We're going to only cover in detail a couple of people in this class over this whole period. Three of them, which is like a majority of them, all have this same thing happen to them. They have something that they're struggling with. And in this like moment of revelation, they're reading Romans. It's always Romans, not the same spot in Romans, but it's always Romans. And they have this moment where they have an epiphany about grace and sin. And it just completely changes their mind. And it happens 3 times. So if I had a nickel for every time it happens, I'd have 15 cents, which isn't a lot, but it's still weird that it happens 3 times out of this whole class. Anyway, if you got that reference, then you're really cool. Um, so he has this moment where he's thinking about Romans, and he's reading Romans, and he's thinking about, and he has this moment where he realizes that grace is the thing that like can free him from his struggles of sin, and that's his like epiphany moment. He ends up getting baptized in 387. He goes back to Hippo. Immediately when he gets to Hippo, they're like the people of Hippo who knew him as a kid, like he was like a celebrity basically in Hippo. So they like immediately like, okay, you need to become a priest. And so he's like, it becomes a priest as soon as he gets there, and then he's the bishop of Hippo in 391. So he goes from being baptized to bishop in 4 years, which is just bonkers. But it tells you this guy's, he was a talented dude. Okay. All right. Wine break. Okay. Now, Augustine, because he was such a smart dude and he was such a good communicator, he ends up basically wading into every one of the controversies or heresies or issues that came up. He was at the center and was, in a lot of ways, the one who pushed the final decision. Like he really helped shape the final decision on several things. Any one of these things would have been enough to make him like well known, but the fact that he gets three, and one of them, in my opinion, his third thing we're going to talk about here, I think may be the single most influential thing anybody does for the entire history of the church. Not exaggerating. Like that's, in my opinion, it's very much up for debate, but that's how impactful this guy is. Okay. Number one, Donatists. Okay, so let's talk about the Donatist controversy. So during the Diocletian persecution, which was like 100 years ago at this time, okay, like this is now like he gets, what did we say? Go back up, 391. So the Donatists were like going on in like 291. Like, so this is the Donatist stuff is going on like 100 years before. So there's still controversy from that Diocletian persecution. That thing had long-lasting impacts. But during the Diocletian persecution, there were some bishops who, under, probably at a sword point, handed over scriptures to be burned by the authorities. Now, the Donatists have said essentially that, hey, those guys committed apostasy. That's not okay. You can't. They should have not. They should have died instead of handing the scriptures over to be burned. So they basically say those guys committed apostasy, so therefore they really aren't part of the church, and therefore any priests that they ordained are not valid priests because the like ordination, the authority comes in from their view through the bishop that ordinated them. And therefore, since they are not valid priests, any of the sacraments that they do, like the communion, are not valid. Any baptisms they do aren't valid. And so there were the Donatists that were these people that said, no, we know who the correct and pure, we are the pure church. We are the ones, we know who the priests are that are the good, valid, and these other priests, they are they are not valid. They are not, they don't count. And so Augustine weighs in on this and he says, no, you guys are wrong. And there's this whole thing about sacraments, and I don't, maybe it'll come up later, but there's this idea. I'll have to come up. I'll have to cover it later. Um, but he basically he makes this sacramental argument that says, no, you guys are wrong. The validity of the sacraments is not impacted by the person, like the validity of the person's. Um, they don't add or subtract anything to it. A priest that does something, they're not adding anything to it, so it doesn't matter if they were like good or bad or whatever. So anyway, the point is that's the side that he takes, is the anti-Donatist side. And this wouldn't be that big of a deal, except for one thing. This drags on. This has already been going on for like 100 years at this point when Augustine shows up. So when he shows up and he starts arguing it, he's not, there are people that just keep fighting and resisting and fighting and resisting. And at first he's like, let's just work this out. Let's talk. Let's get everybody to come to a consensus. But after years go by where he's not, there's still people that don't agree with him. He eventually comes to the opinion, he switches opinion and says, I agree with the people that say we need to force these people to agree. So again, this is post 380. So everybody is a Christian in the Roman Empire now. It's not voluntary anymore. Everybody's a Christian, therefore everybody needs to agree. And Augustine says it's okay, and in fact it's appropriate for the state to use force to compel people to submit to the Orthodox position. Okay, so I'm gonna highlight that. He supports the state compelling people to to submit to the Orthodox position. This will have consequences. Okay. Pelagian controversy. There's a guy named Pelagius, and he says that there is no original sin. Okay, so what's original sin? Okay, little theology side note. So if you read in Romans, especially, I think it's Romans, I want to say 5, maybe it's 7. Anyway, not important. In Romans, Paul has this very specific section where he's talking about Jesus as the archetype against Adam, and it's a juxtaposition of Adam and Jesus, and I could go into the theology of it. It's not important. The point is, in there he says that Paul says that sin entered the world through Adam. Now, some people interpret that to mean that before Adam, there was no sin in the world, and that when Adam sinned, that allowed sin to go into the world, and now we live in a world full of sin, and therefore, just by existing in this sinful world, it's like it rubs off on us, and we have this Adamic sin like stuck to us. And so when we get baptized, we're not just getting baptized of our sin, we're getting baptized of Adam's sin or original sin. And basically Pelagius said that's bunk. No, there is no such thing as original sin. The only sin you have is your sin that you committed. You are not responsible for anybody else's sin. And Augustine disagreed with that. And he said no, but he took a slightly different stance. He basically said that when Adam sinned, there was sin that was in Adam. And when Adam then created children, his sin was passed into his children. And then when those children have children, it was passed from them. So it's the best, in my opinion, the best way to think about it in modern terms is he's basically saying it's a genetic disease. Adam's sin is a genetic disease that we pass down through procreation. Um, and he put his great intellect and his great communication, and this becomes the doctrine on original sin that is still the doctrine the Catholic Church teaches today. That's why Catholics baptize babies. So already, as I said before, people are already doing the practice, but there isn't like they were doing it without a real basis of theology underneath. They were just doing it. This provides that theological basis for why you can baptize your infants. And this is still the doctrine that today the Catholic Church follows. Um, there will be consequences of this. Okay, let's return um, the big one. Okay, it's time to talk about the really, really big one. But to do that, I got to talk a little bit of an aside. We got to talk about the Roman Empire for a second. Okay, so first of all, remember, Constantine, one of the things he did was split the empire. He moved the capital to Constantinople. Let me find my pen. Okay, so got my laser pointer here. Constantinople is here. Rome's over here. As we talked about last time, the Constantinople is closer to like the economic and geopolitical, the population center of the empire. Rome is way over on the western edge. There's a lot of barbarian territory, very poorly populated, low economic value near Rome, to the west of Rome. Rome is geographically in the middle, but it's not politically and economically in the middle. And so by Constantine moving it east, he's moving the capital more towards the center of the empire from especially an economic perspective. Okay. And eventually, not under Constantine, but later, they actually split the empire. And so there's an actual emperor of the West who's in Rome, and there's an emperor of the East who's in Constantinople. Okay. So by the time of Augustine, you've got two emperors, two empires. It's one empire, but it's split in two with two rulers. And that's actually a good idea because of the administration is too much. Anyway, this is what's going on. So I love this map because it shows these red areas are areas that the empire has shrunk by. So the empire grows under the Republic once it kind of hits its zenith just before or just after the it switches from being a republic to an empire to a despotism. I don't know what you got. An empire. And so it grows, but then because of we talked about last time when the empires when an emperor would die, sometimes there would be a war that was fought, a civil war. So they in this period of warfare, and there's a whole bunch of other factors. There are entire books that are written about why Rome fell. I don't have time to talk about any of them. So the point is, there were a lot of reasons that Rome starts shrinking. They can't hold the empire that they have. And so they start losing these territories that are here in red. Now, the East is responsible for this part over here, which is modern day Armenia, and also these parts around here. This black line that I'm trying to highlight with my mouse pointer, I don't know if you can see it or not. I hope you can. That black line is the Danube River. Now, the Danube River is a pretty big river. And if you know anything about warfare, you know that rivers make excellent defensive barriers. So what Rome figures out quickly is that let's pull back to the Danube and let's put a bunch of fortified towns along the Danube. And now we've got like the Great Wall of Eastern Europe, basically, because this is an excellent defensive. It's much easier to defend. And so that's where we're at. Now, one other thing I want to talk about, when Rome built its empire, it did it using the Roman legion. And the Roman legion was by far the most technologically advanced. It has the best equipped, it was the best trained, and it had the best tactics of anything in the world. That's how they won. That's how they grew this giant empire, was by having this incredibly advanced military. But when Rome kind of stops expanding and switches to more of a defensive stance, what that does is it creates these static lines that now causes them to have kind of the same opponents constantly over many, many years. So, like along here, you've got the Germanic tribes up in what's today Germany. They're always the enemy. Instead of having like a moving front line that gives new enemies to fight that hadn't seen them before, didn't know how to fight Romans, the Romans had an advantage. But now you've got this static line where they've known each other for years, and so you end up with this melding of technology and tactics and equipment. So the Roman army actually changes and adopts some of the barbarian things that they like about the barbarian army, and the barbarian army very much copies the equipment, the tactics, and the training of the Romans. And so by this time, by the time of Augustine, the Roman armies and the barbarian armies are on an equal footing now. And that's bad news for the Romans because they can't afford to defend this empire. Like they on an they needed that military advantage. But anyways, all that's to say that now Rome has got a problem. And it and in this time, way up here in this blank space, up here what's today Russia, there's a group showing up called the Huns. You've probably heard of the Huns. This is a nomadic, semi-nomadic, tribal, horse-based, steppe-type army, and they are moving west, and they're not taking names. They are just kicking butt. They are conquering all before them. And so what you have now is in this area called Dacia, which is today like Hungary. Uh, Most of this are just a bunch of barbarian tribes, which at this point, the difference between these barbarian tribes and Romans it's almost nothing. Like the barbarians and the Romans have been intermixing and mingling culturally and technologically so long that there isn't much of a difference anymore. But they're technically not Romans, so they're barbarians. So in here, you have the Huns are coming down. They're on their way, and they are pushing everybody in front of them. And so there's all these groups in this area are all worried about the coming Huns. They have their neighbors that are closer to the Huns coming towards them, trying to get away from the Huns. So they're under pressure. And so this is a mess. And so one of these groups called the Visigoths, which I believe are right here where my mouse is, the mouse pointer is, that's where the Visigoths were. They go to the Romans and say, hey, look, we'll make you a deal. If you let us resettle in your lands on the other side of the Danube, we want to be on the other side of this defensive river where we can help you defend it. We want to settle in your lands. We want to be part of your empire. We'll pay your taxes. We'll be part of your society. And we will offer our armies to help your armies. We'll join forces and we'll defend this Danube River against the Huns. And the Romans say, yes, great, let's do it. And so the Visigoths leave their territory and migrate into what's Illyricum, labeled Illyricum here, into these lands here. And almost immediately, for reasons that escape all logic, the Romans basically immediately renege on this deal, and they basically start mistreating the Visigoths. They start basically enslaving them, and this is one of the all-time stupidest decisions. There's no reason for it, but whatever reason they do that. So they have now ticked off the Visigoths, and they were led by a guy named Alaric. And the first thing they do is they gather up their army and they stomp the Eastern Roman Empire army. They crush them in a battle. And at that point, the Eastern Roman army retreats back to Constantinople to basically defend the capital because there's like nothing between them and the capital. But Alaric's smart. He's like, I'm not going to go that. I'm going to go west. So he actually goes all the way to Rome. And the Western army is weaker than the Eastern army because the Western Empire is much less economically, there's less economy in the West. So they don't have as good an army as the East does. And they just kick the East butt. So the West is like, hey, we got no chance against these guys. So the Western army shadows the Visigoths, but it doesn't fight them. It never offers battle. Just runs away from them. And eventually the Visigoths in 410, they get to Rome, and it's basically they siege it. they break in and they just sack the city. They steal everything that they can. There's bloodshed. There's, it's bad. I don't have the words to describe the impact that this has on the Roman people all over the empire, all over the world. Rome is sacked. They called Rome the eternal city. Jerome says Rome, the city that conquered the world, is herself taken. This is this is catastrophic. And again, it's so hard for me to put into words what this meant for the people that when they heard this. Rome was not a city. It wasn't even an empire. It was an idea. It was, in fact, civilization itself. It was this light of of order in chaotic darkness. When Rome came in and conquered a territory, they provided laws. Before that, you had despots, kings that one day they could love you and the next they could execute you. Like there were no like consistent legal system. There wasn't a legal system. There wasn't laws that were consistent you could count on. It was chaos. Rome comes in and they bring laws and structure, and there was an appeal process. Um, they swept the seas of pirates. They kept the roads clear of bandits. They There was a lot that the Romans that there was they brought their own, negatives. I'm not they weren't all positives, but what people after they had been part of the Roman Empire for a while, almost universally loved Rome. They worshiped Rome as a goddess because it was this light of civilization in a darkness. That's how they saw themselves. Rome wasn't a city, it is civilization itself. It's order against chaos. And when Rome falls, it's like society itself has collapsed. Satan has won. Like it's a disaster. And of course, what are the people going to think? This is 410. This is almost 100 years to the day after Constantine. 97 years after Constantine. What are they going to think? It doesn't take a genius to go, when we were pagans, we conquered the world. We become Christians and Rome gets sacked. What's going on? Did we make a mistake? Did we pick the wrong religion? This is on the minds of everybody. This is on the tongues. This is the talk of the world. Oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. I go a little long. Hope you stay with me. I blame the IT failure. Anyway, so this is what everybody's arguing. This is what everybody's talking about. And you can imagine in Hippo, Augustine, the bishop of Hippo, is on the shores receiving these refugees coming from Rome, hearing about the sack, hearing about the horrible things that happened, hearing people talk about, did we make a mistake? Is Christianity the reason why? And he is not going to let this stand. He is going to devote his incredible intellect and his incredible talents to answering this question. And of course, you know what his answer is. It's no, that's not. So he spends 16 years writing a book called The City of God. This book is, in my opinion, the most influential single piece in all of Christian history. If you picked one thing, I would pick this book. In this book, his whole argument is Rome is temporary. Rome is something that just rises and falls. Empires come and go, kingdoms come and go. Anything that's of this world is temporal. It's temporary. It's not made to last. But the church, capital C church, is eternal. And because anything that's eternal is just by nature superior to anything that's not eternal, so is the church is superior to any sort of government, any sort of secular anything. And there's this quote here from the book: "The heavenly city outshines Rome beyond comparison. There, instead of victory, is truth. Instead of high rank, holiness. Instead of peace, felicity. Instead of life, eternity." Here's the thing. There's going to be some consequences to this because he said the church has is superior. It has authority over anything that's secular. That's the fundamental thesis of what he has to say here. So, to summarize, here's Augustine's legacy. And like I said, I think the third one of this is makes him the single, just by itself, makes him the most influential person in all of church history. Just saying that right now, which is saying something because there's some really influential people coming up. But first, the Donatists. So we talked about the Donatist thing, and from that, he said that yeah, it's okay for the church to compel people, even with force, to comply with church orthodoxy because everybody's a Christian. So it's okay to use force. Pelagian gives the theological basis for infant baptism. The concept of original sin is codified in Catholic theology at this point. And finally, the big one, the city of God, the idea that the church has authority over anything that's earthly and temporal. And that, of course, will have big consequences. Okay. All right. So that's all I got. Oh my goodness, nailed it right on time. Uh, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks, part three. And what I want you to do, what I want you to think about is what do these three things, Augustine's legacy, what impact is that going to have on the church, on not just the church, what's it going to have on society? What does a society look like that lives like this, that puts this into practice? So that's kind of the question. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody. Got any questions or anything? I'll stay on for a few more minutes. If you want to drink some wine with me, I'll open in the floor here. Anybody? Yeah.
Hey man, nicely done. I kind of barely remember some of this stuff from Eastern Civ in college, and but then you fill it up. Uh, yeah, I love how you boil down the phases of him. Yeah, nicely done, bud. And it's making me want definitely some